All right, everybody. So we were under the impression that there was no sound. Can people hear us now? Anybody feel free to... Okay. All right. So looks like our sound is back up. I am sorry for that. We had some formatting issues before we got started that kind of made it difficult for us to get everything together. So hopefully everything should be working now. We're going to go back to the beginning of our slideshow. That way we can kind of catch up on that information that we were talking through that you guys may not have been able to hear, just so that, you know, we make sure that you guys are hearing what we're putting out. So we're going to come back to equipment you need to get started. So Kristen, can you talk a little bit more about, you know, equipment you'd want as you're getting started as a beekeeper?
Yeah. So the very basics you should be able to find at any of the major beekeeping supplies, Dadant, Kelly Bees, Man Lake, and I highly suggest starting with them. They do have starter kits.
Okay.
They have some stuff in there you probably don't need.
Yeah.
So the bare minimum, really, the slide demonstrates it really well. And what you don't have to worry about is that with the Langstroth, all the measurements are going to be the same across the board. Like no matter who you buy it from, your frames are in the same dimension. If it's a 10 frame box that you're buying a super, it's in the same dimension no matter who you buy it from.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice, is that equipment's interchangeable. And then what's left to decide is like how many of each thing you want.
Yeah.
So as we were saying before, I recommend starting off 2 deep supers for your brood nest, and 4 to 6 shallow supers. If you're going mediums, do like 2 to 3 for your honey harvest.
Okay.
And then you just do the math on how many frames for each one that you need to buy to fill it up. So kind of the basic setup as it's depicted in this slide is you need a hive stand. So it's got to sit on something off the ground. Sometimes it's cinder blocks. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
And then you've got your bottom board. That can be a full bottom board or a screen board. Screen boards are somewhat beneficial if you're trying to control mite populations, which we can talk about later.
Yeah.
And then directly on top of that rests your boxes, or what we call supers. So beekeepers call these boxes supers. And it's because when you're putting boxes on top of boxes, it's superimposing on the other box. So they just keep going like this. And then you'll need your inner cover on top and then a lid. And the inner cover is different from the lid.
Okay.
The inner cover is beneficial in that it kind of creates, it seals off the top of the hive so that no one can get in.
Yeah.
Bees get a lot of visitors.
Yeah.
Of all kinds. And then the lid sits on top so that it creates a space so that there's actually airflow.
Yeah.
So if you just stick a lid on top of the hive, which I have seen people do, it cuts off all that ventilation, which they really, really need.
Yeah.
So those are the basic things. Cost-wise, pretty much everyone's going to run the same. There's maybe a little cost difference between the companies, but not that much.
Sure.
A lot of the companies will offer differences between like economy grade wood, commercial grade wood, and then like something a bit more fancier. Okay. Don't get the economy.
Okay.
I mean, I shouldn't. They might get mad at me for saying that, maybe, but
yeah.
I've not had good experience with it.
Okay.
So those are the basic things you'll need to put bees into.
Okay.
If you're starting off with 2 hives, maybe order 1 or 2 more supers just in case.
Okay.
If you're starting with 3, like be prepared that you may need more space for your bees.
Yeah, for sure.
It's better to be over prepared for that than under prepared and have your bees leave.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough space.
For sure. We were also kind of talking about frames earlier. So there's wooden frames and there's with wax put into them, and then there's also plastic frames with plastic kind of foundation. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of like your preference there and why?
Okay. So my preference is old school.
Yeah.
And the reason is just the bees like it better. And that's my opinion as a beekeeper. I mean, but there's definitely benefits to the plastic foundation as well, and plastic frames.
Sure.
So there's a lot out there on the market to buy.
Yeah.
My preference is the wooden frames with the wax foundation insert. With your shallow and medium frames, you will not have to cross wire. With your deep frames, you will have to crosswire, and that requires buying even more equipment.
Yeah.
The plastic foundation is also good. The bees don't like it as much. The benefits there are, it doesn't fall apart like the wax foundation does.
Yeah.
It's not going to do a blowout in your extractor when you're doing honey.
Yeah.
But the bees don't like it as much. Yeah. So, and that means when they go to build it out, to make their comb on it, it kind of sometimes will get waves in it, and they won't build it out as far, which means the queens won't like it as much to land because they like the deeper cells to land.
Okay.
Some of our volunteer beekeepers have told me they've had better luck if they coat the plastic foundation with a light layer of beeswax.
Okay, interesting.
To get the bees started. Yeah. Like, oh, this is a fun place to start.
Yes.
You know? So that's, there's a lot of little things you can do like that.
Yeah.
That you kind of learn as you go along.
Sure.
And you learn from other beekeepers as you go along.
For sure.
But those are and then there's also frames that are completely plastic.
Okay.
Those I don't like at all.
Yeah.
They're a little skinnier.
Uh-huh.
So when you put them in the hive, the bees build in between.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It just gets messy. I just don't. And they tend to warp a little bit.
Okay.
So then you've got like weird,
waves and things like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
yeah, I know I've always had experience with wax foundation and wooden frames and everything like that. Just like taking the time to put the foundation in every,
it's
whenever I need
fun to do.
Yeah.
I actually like getting you got your tools and you tinker around, and it's kind of nice. And you put on a movie, you know, and it's kind of nice to do.
I have like that mini hammer.
Yeah, the little tiny mini hammer. And, and there's plenty of videos online. There's so many videos online of how to put wax foundation together.
For sure.
So if you're completely unhandy with tools, you can buy it pre-assembled. Simpson's Bee Supply here in Ohio does it. There are a few other places that will do it for you.
Sure.
Another beekeeper may do it for you.
Yeah.
Trade something
for
or pay them, whatever.
Yeah.
So
that sounds good. Does anybody have any questions regarding kind of equipment you need to get started before we move on to our next slide? Feel free to throw it in there. If I see it before we move on, I think we'll be able to answer it. All right, so next up is maintenance tools. So as you're getting started, there's all sorts of things you need, I feel like, for just maintenance in general. So let's talk a little bit about protective gear getting started. I know a lot of times you see the full bee suits, you'll see just the tops that you can wear, and even just veils, and then gloves too. So what's your preference, and what do you recommend for someone getting started?
So my preference is boots, jeans, a button-down shirt with a collar.
Yeah. And
I have a hat, and I have one of just the mesh tutu veil.
Yeah.
Like over it. That's what I was thrown out into the yard 20 years ago in. It was kind of like, here's what we wear. This is why. The main thing is you stay cooler.
Yeah.
It's comfortable. The benefit to wearing a hat with the mesh veil over it is that you can kind of see all sides. A lot of the other veils, they either have I think there's one that's kind of like a hood, and then there's just the mesh screen in front. They're just not comfortable for me. The main thing is that you're comfortable in what you're wearing. You feel safe and you're comfortable.
Sure.
So the kind of tutu-like veils, if the wind blows the wrong way, you just get stung right on the cheek.
Yeah.
Whereas the more sturdy ones, the bees are not getting it.
Yeah.
The bee suits, you can get a full bee suit if you want. You can get just the jacket. You could just wear a shirt. It depends on your comfort level with the bees.
Yeah.
So I've been through bee yards where there's Africanized bees.
Oh, wow.
You wear 2 suits and you duct tape everything together.
Yeah. That's scary.
You don't mess around with them.
Yeah.
Our bees at Peach luckier where we do not have Africanized bees in our bees.
Yes.
And so, the full jacket is often the jackets you can buy are nice because it's a thicker fabric. They're not going to get through it. Sometimes they get through the thinner shirts as far as stings.
Yeah.
As far as gloves, I don't wear gloves, but it was how I was trained.
Okay.
My mentor felt that if you're wearing gloves, you can't feel the bees in the hive. And if you can't feel them, you're more likely to squish them and roll them, which releases more alarm pheromone, which makes it harder to work the hive.
Right.
And the queen will run.
Yeah.
But as a beginning beekeeper, and you're not working with a mentor of that kind of capacity, it may be more comfortable for you to wear gloves, so you feel protected and you're not getting stung.
Yeah.
And getting stung is not fun. It happens, but you know, but wherever your comfort level is what you should do. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look cool or it does look cool or whatever somebody thinks. It's if you feel safe and if you're comfortable working your bees.
I know I was saying earlier that whenever I'm out working on my hive, sometimes it'll just depend on the hive I'm working in, or just depend on kind of the conditions. I'll have on leather gloves to start with, or I'll take them off, you know, to work a different hive, or sometimes I'll just get annoyed with wearing the gloves and I'll just take them off. So
and be aware too, whatever you wear is going to get stained and gross. Yeah. Which is nice about the bee suits, because then you're not ruining like your favorite pair of jeans or like the shirt that your dad gave you or whatever. Yeah. Like it's gonna get yellow and gross and stained. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
No, that's like, don't wear your nice jeans into the bee yard.
Yes, that's definitely a valid point. I know we had some just like protective tops that were just like disgusting, you know, and it was just like, oh.
Propolis gets everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about like smokers and hive tools and bee brushes. So what are kind of like your essentials there, and you know, why, I guess, you know, how do you get a smoker started? Yeah. You know, what's the purpose of a hive tool for someone that may not know? And a bee brush too.
Okay. So hive tool, well, let's start with smoker. The most important tool is smoker. Yeah. Okay. My boss used to say you can go to the yard wearing basically nothing, but you got to have a smoker. Yeah. So smoke is your control when you're working bees. What it does is it makes them think their hive is burning. Sorry. It makes them think their hive's on fire, so they eat as much honey as they possibly can.
Oh my goodness.
Which makes them sleepy and happy. Yeah. So smoke will, you can get bees to move if you need them to move out of a spot. So you've got to have a smoker. Sure. I've been doing this 20 years. I will not go near bees without a smoker. Okay. It is a safety issue. So, you know, if you're working a hive and they start to boil out and get out of control, you just smoke them and walk away. And the smoke gets them to center again around the queen, and it gets them to calm down. Yeah. Smoke. This is definitely an older style smoker. It will still work. They come in all kinds of ranges of sizes. I kind of prefer a bigger size, which the benefit there is that with the bigger canister, you don't. So if you're out working bees for a full day, you probably have to refill your smoker a number of times just because it'll go out. Yeah. As far as smoker fuel, everyone's got preferences. Right. I like to. You've got to start with kindling. So that could be small twigs, pine needles, paper, newspaper. Okay. What do we use here? Shavings, which because they have the wood carving class. Yeah. So you got to start with your kindling. You get that lit, and then you want to add in something that's going to sustain a little longer. A lot of beekeepers like the pellets, the wood pellets you can buy for like your wood burning stoves. Yeah. Or actual smokers. You know, like you'd smoke meat. Yes. Honestly, I usually find like pine cones and sticks and whatever else we have like in our, you know, smaller pieces, chunks of wood. And you want to get that going. The bellow is what's gonna pump air through it to get the fire going. Yeah. So, and that's what's gonna propel the smoke out. A lot of times you get it going, it's gonna get real hot. That smoke's gonna get hot, and it's gonna hurt the bees. Okay. So what I always do, that my mentor taught me, is I'll take a bunch of fresh grass or fresh leaves or something, and I'll put this off. And stick it right here in the top. Okay. So just ball it up, stick it in the top. Yeah. And that creates a cooling layer in between the hot smoke and what's coming out on the bees.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So it gives them a little cooler smoke. And but yeah, you definitely want to make sure you're checking your smoker an hour into it or so, and make sure you're re-firing it so it doesn't go out on you in the middle of working a hive in the rain.
Yes.
It's not an opportune time for your smoker to go out on you.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there's a lot of different varieties. There's real fancy ones. There's basic ones. Basic will work.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you want to spend. And yeah, so smoker, absolutely. Hive tool is the next necessity. My husband likes to joke with me that this is called a window shim. I'm like, funny. No, this is a hive tool. He's not a window shim. They probably were originally, I know they were originally carpentry tools.
Yeah.
They are very sharp.
Yeah.
So I've ripped a number of seat cushions in my truck, forgetting they were in my back pocket.
Yeah.
And I've definitely had a few injuries from them. So just be aware that this edge is very sharp and this edge is very sharp.
Yeah.
And they can do what you need it to do.
Sure.
But yeah, I always order a couple because I lose them.
Yes.
Yeah, I always have a couple laying around. And they just basically, if you saw, the picture of the hive earlier, they get in between the hives so you can pry them apart. Bees like to glue everything shut.
Right.
With propolis.
Yes.
So this is why it needs to be sharp, because it's got to get into their glue. And in between the frames. So, yep, that's a basic hive tool.
Sweet. So what about a bee brush? Is that something that's essential for you when you're working hives, or?
It is.
It is.
And I get really frustrated when I get out there and I realize I don't have it with me. And the reason is that sometimes queen cells everywhere. If you're trying to save the queen cells to do like, this is more advanced, but splits or like anything else, you don't want to shake the frame.
Right.
Because it's going to damage the queen. So bee brushes brushes the bees very gently off. They don't get mad at it most of the time.
Yeah.
And that way you can, do your work that way. It's what I use mostly for honey harvest.
Okay.
I do not like to use the chemicals. Some of them are a bit nicer, I think, these days.
Okay.
But I'll just pull the honey frames out and brush the bees off or shake them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like to have a bee brush with me all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely something that, like, I get out there and I'm like, oh, shoot, I didn't bring it.
Grabbing, like, leaves off the tree.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating experience.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's nice to have the bee brush. The other thing that I like to keep on me a lot of the time when I'm out there is I was going to say a paint pen, but that's just because I prefer to like to mark the queens.
Sure.
So, but if you're not getting into that work, that's not necessarily something you have to have.
Yeah.
But that's also something I get on.
Yeah. Do you normally use just like a Sharpie, like paint pen? Like
it's the whatever they sell them. I can't remember the brand name.
I can't.
Yeah, it's just a regular paint pen.
Okay.
You can get fancy and order the stickers, but it takes glue, and that's like
tough to deal with out there.
Yeah, if you're not doing a breeding program, it's really not
important.
No.
Yeah, I've never really felt the need to mark my queens because I wasn't doing anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
paint pens will work.
Yeah.
And it is nice to mark the queen. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't need to. Sometimes it's nice to mark it.
Yeah.
So those are the basics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next slide, extractive tools. So kind of, I feel like the main reason a lot of times people get into beekeeping is because they're after the honey.
Yeah.
And there is more equipment that goes into, extracting the honey. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of like selecting an extractor, like a extracting knife, like a hot knife or something, scrapers, things like that you feel are pretty essential in your honey extraction process?
Yeah. So as we talked about before, just with like the beginning kits, a lot of places will offer like an extraction kit.
Right.
This is another thing, like you really don't know what you need until you get into it.
Yeah.
And then you start figuring out like, oh, I really like this setup better than this setup.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, sometimes you got to do it a couple times and just kind of like grit.
Yeah.
Go, oh, this is awful. I'm going to change this next time.
Yeah.
The very basics, the extractor itself, you can get real fancy and expensive. You can get very basic and more and less expensive.
Okay.
Extractors are pricey.
Yeah.
They're going to be pricey. There's a lot you can find used.
Yeah.
So definitely check around. Check in with your bee association and see if anybody's selling. If you've got like 1 or 2 hives, it's not a lot of honey you're dealing with. You may just want to ask somebody if you can borrow their extractor or if they'd want to do some extraction for you.
Yeah.
That might be more beneficial than going into and buying all this equipment.
For sure.
A basic beekeeping, if you're running less than 10 hives, you do not need a mechanized. You got like torn rotator cuffs or something. You don't want to like, and then maybe it might be worth it. But some of the like, honestly, if running less than 10 hives, a 4-frame extractor is absolutely fine. It's going to do exactly what you need it to do.
For sure.
You'll definitely need a valve bucket.
Yes.
And you'll need strainers. And then you'll need some way to get the wax cappings off.
Yeah.
So a lot of the hot electric knives, which are really nice, honestly, if you're going to spend money, I would spend it there.
Okay.
The comb scrapers work.
Yeah.
They're messier.
Yeah.
The knife is nice because it just cuts it right off. And then you've got your beautiful cappings that you can separate from the honey.
Right.
And you're not like scratching at with the knife.
Yeah.
Is on the knife.
Okay.
And obviously the extractors anywhere from 200 up to however much you want to spend.
Yeah.
So that can get pricey. Then you'll need bottles to put it in.
Yes.
Whatever
lids,
those look like.
Labels.
Labels if you want, lids. And depending on the time of year you're doing this, you may have some crystallization. So you may have to reheat the honey at some point.
For sure.
And if you'll see on all the websites, there's varying degrees of equipment to do that.
Yeah.
So you can go really low tech or you can go really high tech with it.
Yeah.
It just depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. I know I always, had a just like a couple frame extractor and just like cranked it.
Yeah.
We didn't even like drill it to the ground or anything. Someone would just sit on top of it.
Yeah.
And then one person would go.
Well, it's like if you only do it once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And you don't have a lot of hives.
Yeah.
You don't really need to put a lot of money into it or effort into it. Really,
Sure.
It's like you're just kind of going to deal with the honey.
Yeah.
Some of the operations I've done some work with run 10,000, 20,000 hives, and they've got an entire barn honey house allocated to pretty much honey extraction and production.
Right.
Almost full time all year round.
Yeah.
So you got to figure out what you got, and then as far as how many hives you have, and that will determine the equipment you have to buy.
For sure. For sure. All right, we're gonna move on to our next slide now. Actually identifying parts of the hive. So like that's definitely super important, is being able to identify honeybees in general, as you're working, so you can kind of figure out what's going on in the hive. So we have a couple images up. Can you talk about kind of like the importance of identifying them and their roles and everything?
Yeah, I think this is the most important part for me. For me, in my opinion, this is the most important part because you really have to understand the animal if you're going to work with it and keep it alive.
Sure.
And right now, that's a challenging thing to do, I'll be honest, for a lot of beekeepers.
Sure.
For me, it's been challenging keeping bees alive because there's a lot of things that we're struggling with. So the worker bee is a female bee. She's the smallest one there on the left. She has a stinger. It is detachable, so it's not retractable. So once she stings you, she dies. The worker bees, when they emerge, will basically go from one job to another. Fascinating and fun to understand.
For sure.
And that gets very complicated, which we don't need to cover today. But the most important thing is the worker bees are responsible for maintaining the hive. They're the ones that do everything. They're going to go out and forage. They're going to build all the wax. They're going to build all the comb. They're going to take care of the babies. Yeah. And they're the ones that you see with the beautiful little patches of pollen on their legs coming back to the hive. They're basically responsible for everything. They are direct daughters of the queen. And so for anyone that doesn't know, honeybees are a haploid-diploid system. Sure. The queen and the workers are haploid, like we are. They have both genetic sets from mom and dad. And the boy bees are diploid. Queen queen and workers are diploid. Boy bees are haploid.
Okay.
Totally messed that up.
It's okay.
Backwards. Switch it. So, so the wonderful thing about that is when you have your hives, what the workers are doing are directly descended from what your queen is genetically.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're liking what the workers are doing, that's because of what the queen is.
Yeah.
And you can begin to look at bees that way as far as like, oh, I really like this queen. When you hear beekeepers talking about that, that's what they're referring to.
Yeah.
So the queen is not technically, maybe the biggest one in the hive. The boy bees are pretty big, but they're like wide big. The queen is long big. So she has that elongated abdomen. And that comes from when she is first hatched as an egg, she's fed 3,000 times the amount of food that a worker bee is fed.
Yeah.
And so all of that nutrition is what allows her reproductive system to develop.
Sure.
The worker bees have those reproductive systems, but they're just never developed because they're not fed the food.
Mm-hmm.
And the food is what we know as royal jelly.
Yeah.
So it's something that a lot of health food people like, and they'll take it as supplements and stuff. But we like it as beekeepers because you can actually harvest it and use it to make queens.
Yeah.
But that queen is developed from being fed royal jelly. She will emerge after 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
She'll go on her mating flight and within 2 to 3 weeks be laying eggs in the hive.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So, and typically most queens are in prime productivity up to 3 to 5 years of life.
Wow.
They start to taper off after that.
Yeah.
So what you'll see is pheromone levels drop.
Mm-hmm.
Productivity in hive is going to drop too.
Sure.
And that at that point you're going to replace your queen.
Sure. So would you recommend just buying a new queen from someone then?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Queen rearing is a whole other
deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fun but very advanced beekeeping. Yeah. Means most commercial beekeepers will replace queens every single year.
Yeah.
For people just keeping hives for the fun of it,
mm-hmm.
Maybe every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely heard that about like year 4 and 5. They kind of are just like tapering off.
Yeah.
So.
And you can even see it. You can look at a queen and you'll start to see like the wings start edges.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of indicates she's kind of getting beaten up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes though, if the queen doesn't mate well or if she's just kind of scrawny to start with, wasn't fed well as an embryo, that you'll start to see that she's not laying as well in the hive.
Mm-hmm.
You'll start to see other things like the brood pattern is off. And this is why it's so important to look into the hive, is that you can really start to see the health of your hive before it begins to wane.
Yeah.
And catch it then before you lose your bees.
Right. That makes sense. All right. Do you want to talk anything about the drone, or we're going to go ahead and move on to the...
They're just really cute.
Yeah.
and they do nothing but beg for food.
Right.
And mate.
Yeah.
So.
That's their only role.
That's their only role.
All right. So the next slide is identifying parts of the hive. So this is kind of what Christian was referring to when she said the brood pattern. If you can see the image pretty well, there's like drone brood, worker brood, like just an empty cell, honey, pollen. And these are all really important pieces to be able to identify as you're working the hive. I know that's one of the biggest things I look for, just kind of figuring out what you have going on in your hive. So can you talk a little bit more about that and like identifying it and why it's important and everything?
Yeah, it's, as we were just talking about, it's really important to be able to know if your hive is healthy.
Yeah.
And so one of the great markers of that is when you pull up your frame, basically the frame should be organized in a very specific ways. And I'm talking about a frame that's in the center of the hive.
Mm-hmm.
So in any hive, the general organization is right in the center is going to be your brood chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the bees like to have their brood in the center so it's protected from predators. Because predators, when they get a hive, they don't just want honey; they want the brood too. It's full of yummy protein.
Right.
So that's going to be the center, and then after that, you're going to have some frames of pollen / partial honey, and then you're going to have frames of honey.
Okay.
So honey, pollen, brood. Youngest brood right in the center.
Mm-hmm.
So when you pull up the frame, you should generally see, you're going to see very young brood, eggs in the center, older brood, capped brood, maybe a rainbow of pollen, and then on the very edges you'll see some capped honey, or maybe nectar hasn't been filled in yet.
Yeah.
So you're looking for that beautiful rainbow pattern, and that tells you that the queen has vigor, she has plenty of pheromone, she has plenty of eggs, and she's laying well. And so as soon as all of that cat brood emerges, she's laying new in the spots that it came out of.
Yeah.
She's constantly laying.
Yeah.
She's only lived during the season maybe 6 weeks.
Sure.
So she's got to regenerate that population constantly.
Yeah.
She'll lay 3,000 to 10,000 eggs a day.
Wow.
So
yeah.
she's got to keep going.
Yeah. And this will commonly be found in the deep supers.
Deep supers, yeah. If you let her get up in the shallows, she'll do that there.
Right.
She'll lay everywhere.
Yeah.
So don't, it's a lot of preference.
Sure.
I tend to not like queen excluders.
Okay.
Because it forces her to stay in one place.
Yeah.
And it can sometimes hamper the population that she might need.
Yeah.
But also, I don't like picking through honey frames when I'm doing honey harvest.
Yes.
So it's like it's a little give and take there.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I never really like to use queen excluders, so I would just pick and choose. But I also didn't have a ton of hives, so you
got a lot of them.
Yeah.
You don't want to pick.
Right.
If you got a little, it's okay.
Yeah.
You can go through your hive and get friendly with everybody.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move back. We are going to talk about threats and things like that. So I realize that our camera is frozen. So, feel free to listen to us talk about the threats as we, go on. And also, this is a good time now if you have questions. I know earlier Kate asked, what happens if you don't extract the honey? So can you talk about that?
Yeah, that is a very good question.
Sure.
As we often say, honey happens.
Yeah.
We don't always want to deal with it.
Yeah.
If you don't extract the honey, meaning you don't take it out of the hive at all, the bees will most likely run out of room.
Okay.
They kind of, left to their own devices, will keep building and building. But like if they're in like a tree somewhere, they're just going to keep building.
Right.
If they're stuck in a hive and they don't have enough room, you're going to open that hive. There's going to be honey everywhere.
Yeah. It's
just a mess. So if you don't take it off, they just run out of room. If they run out of room to lay, you start to see a population drop.
Yeah.
And that's part of a collapse problem.
Okay.
So you got to take the honey off.
Okay.
You just don't want to take too much.
Yeah.
And if you don't extract, so if you take the honey frames out but don't extract them, they will keep for a while, but eventually you may begin to have problems with fermentation, wax frames. As soon as you get honey out of the hive, you got to extract it. You don't wait around. Yeah. Turns into a big mess you don't want to deal with. For sure. So I don't know if you've had experience that where you've taken frames out and not gone to, or you did it right away, or
I've pretty much always done it right away. Maybe I'll leave it a couple days, but that's about it. So
I mean, part of the issue we always had was we just needed new frames to be able to put back into hives. Yeah. So it's like you got to get those frames extracted, so you can take the extracted frames and put them right back in the hive. Yeah. So the bees can have some space to be able to work. Right. Because often you have several flows during the year. Yeah. Several nectar flows. Yes. Where the bees are bringing in a lot of nectar at one time, and they need somewhere to put it. Right. So you're constantly balancing a space issue in your hives, constantly, all the time. Yeah. It's really fun. Yeah.
So it doesn't look like we have any upcoming questions. So let's talk about some threats. I know for me, one of my, getting into it, I think one of the biggest challenges is just getting through the winter. I feel like for beekeepers, especially here in Ohio, where sometimes we'll have below zero nights, which is just a huge challenge.
I think the bigger challenge is when it goes up in temperature.
Okay.
Because the problem then is you have bees. So if it goes up above the 40s, bees are active.
And then they're confused.
And then they're eating their stores.
Yeah.
That they shouldn't be eating because they've got to get through probably another 2 to 3 months of cold weather. For sure. So that's when it getting very, very cold can be somewhat hard depending on the race of bees you have. Yeah. And then, but also the fluctuation. If we've been experiencing these really warm weathers in Ohio where the bees just are not staying in that stasis, clustered up in their ball all year round. Like this past winter was one of the most challenging ones. Yeah. Than last winter. Yeah. And we were basically just feeding the hives all year round. Right. I'm sorry, all winter long. Yeah. Because they just weren't staying in that cluster. Yeah. So if they're moving, they're using energy, and if they don't have food, they're going to starve. Right. It's tough.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I have been recommending to people to just like constantly feed through the winter too,
Yeah.
just because it's been so tough.
Feed through the late fall.
Yeah.
Like feed, and then like just baby them.
Yeah.
And then through the winter, if you can put that dry root sugar out on the hives, just on the inner cover, that's less likely to get them dysentery and other issues they may have with. I mean, they won't even take syrup once it's below 60 degrees outside. They won't even take the syrup. Maybe 50 degrees. But yeah. It's hard to winter bees. I've had a lot of people ask me if you should insulate the outside of the hive.
Mm-hmm.
I think that depends on where you are.
Okay.
Some of the bees I help with are right next to a lake.
Yeah.
So yes.
You would.
Yeah, we put hay barrels up against between them, buffering and the wind coming off the lake.
Okay.
Because that wind gets real cold in the wintertime.
Okay.
And that seemed to really help.
Yeah.
But as far as like wrapping the hives in something, I've never really done that.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they've got enough.
Okay.
So.
Interesting. I one of my like research projects that I did using insulation, like wrapping around beehives, and I had 80% success rate over the winter versus like 20%
that is
survive rate.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I've used
what were you using?
I used reflective bubble wrap for the study, and then other than that I normally will just use like roofing paper.
Yeah.
Just because it works pretty well and it's black, so it helps
with the sun.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean I've always found that it works pretty well. So that it just depends, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's so much, like every single bee yard is different.
Yeah.
Every location is different. You just have to figure out, like, I say always err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
So if you want to insulate your hives, go for it.
Right.
Because then at least it's not going to do any harm.
Right.
Commercially, we never did it just because that's a lot of insulation.
Yeah, that would be
it's
insane.
Not something that's doable commercially.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you got err on the side of caution, baby them, pamper them. Especially now, with as much as going on, give them every single chance you can.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're running out of time, so we're going to answer one last question. Can I put in a hive in the suburban area with close neighbors? So this might have been a part that was cut out, but it kind of just depends on where you are, like the homeowners association, what kind of rules they have, and then even like you mentioned, if maybe all the neighbors around you have to decide if it's okay or not.
Yeah, I know in the city of Columbus you have to get approval from all of the properties adjoining your property.
Yeah,
to be able to put bees there. I've heard that people within the city and suburbs do okay with their bees.
Mm-hmm.
My experience in helping people has not been that.
Interesting.
The number one issue that I see is pesticide kill.
Yeah.
Herbicide and fungicide issues. Is that people are spraying a lot of stuff and the bees are coming in contact with it and it's killing them.
Yeah.
And the hives just collapse.
For sure.
So, it depends. You can try it and see.
Yeah.
Some people do well, some people don't.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good answer. So thank you all for tuning in this week. I apologize for our technical issues. We've been working on figuring everything out. This is just our second week, so thank you for, hanging in there with us. This will be available to watch afterwards. I'll crop out that section where we were silent for a while, and you may be able to come back and kind of listen a little bit better. And then I hope this doesn't deter you from tuning in next week when we go over integrated livestock management. So we're going to talk